sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Today, we're going to learn Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 74, Dīghanakhasutta. Okay, so let's begin the discourse, Majjhima Nikaya number 74. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Rajagaha in the Boar's Cave on the mountain Vulture Peak. Then the wanderer, Dīghanakha, went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he stood at one side and said to the Blessed One, Master Gotama, my doctrine and view is this: nothing is acceptable to me. So what is his view? Nothing is acceptable to me. So he doesn't like anything, or he dislikes everything. That is his view. So this wanderer was actually the Venerable Sariputta's nephew. So he wasn't a Buddhist, but he was a spiritual wanderer who gave up the household life. And so one day he met the Buddha at the Boar's Cave and had a conversation with him. So this is the record of that conversation. So his view, nothing is acceptable to me. I think we can understand this in multiple ways. So first, now I think most of you have probably heard, in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha describes two kinds of extreme views. It's really amazing, actually, when we learn the Buddhist teachings and learn about such a thing as views, ditthi. So the Buddha describes how beings, not only human beings, but devas as well, hold like fixed conceptual views, worldviews about this life, about the world, about the nature of existence. So for some of you who are maybe philosophically inclined, it's maybe quite interesting the way the Buddha describes views. So for the most part, beings in the world hold wrong view. So wrong view we can understand in several ways. So wrong view in the sense, so not believing in the existence of karma and its results, not believing in the existence of a next life, not believing that there are good and bad deeds, right? So there's a kind of modernist philosophy, maybe postmodern even, that thinks good and bad are like conventions. So we can see in various countries, maybe certain things might be legal in one country, but illegal in another. So one country decides such a thing is considered, it's not bad, it's acceptable for people to engage in. And in another country, such an action is illegal, right? So the social conventions differ by country and culture. So a person can see that and come to the wrong conclusion that good and bad are just conventions, that there's no real good and bad in the world. That's a wrong view. And also believing that there are no spontaneously born beings. So there are no, person can believe there are no devas, there are no hell beings. It's impossible to be born as a ghost. These are wrong views. And to not accept that there are ascetics and Brahmins in the world who have realized the nature of this world, who have gained direct realization of it and then teach it to others. To believe that there are no such people in the world, that is also part of a wrong view. So right view, mundane right view, is where we need to begin in practicing the Dhamma. So you probably heard in detail the description of mundane right view, to accept the existence of good and bad actions. There is good karma and bad karma, and we experience the results of the actions that we do by body, speech, and mind. There is a next life. There is such a thing as samsara that we are all traveling in. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. So a person with right view believes in the Deva world, believes it's possible to be reborn there, believes in such a world as the hell world, as a ghost world. So, and what's very important to arrive at this right view, we should have faith in the Buddha. Why? Because the Buddha taught this as part of the Buddha's teachings. So once the Buddha gained realization, gained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he gained 3 knowledges. One, to be able to recollect his past lives and the lives of other beings. So the Buddha saw in his own experience, there is such a thing as samsara, as the cycle of birth and death that he has been traveling in, and other beings have been traveling in for a unimaginably long period of time. And the Buddha also saw with the divine eye how beings pass away and are reborn according to their karma, according to their actions. So with that knowledge, the Buddha understood that there is such a thing as karma. So it's not a theory in the Buddha's teaching. It's not something that he logically thought out and then taught. It's something the Buddha realized through his own experience. The Buddha saw the Deva world. The Buddha traveled to the Deva world, and then he taught about the Deva world. So to begin with the practice of the Dhamma, to begin by developing wholesome qualities, removing unwholesome qualities, to collect merit and secure for ourselves a good destination in the future life, because our time in the human world is very limited. Appangvata jivitang nidam. So our lifespan is short in the human world. Most people these days live around 80. But who can say what will happen tomorrow, right? Ko janya maranang suvi. Who knows whether tomorrow we won't die or not, right? It can happen, right? So to begin by practicing the Dhamma, we need to arrive at right view based on faith in the Buddha. Then we have the opportunity to develop further. So the Buddha taught there are 2 kinds of extreme views that people hold. The view of eternalism and the view of annihilationism. Have any of you heard about these? Do they ring a bell? No? Maybe some of
Yes,
you.
Bhante. Yes.
Okay. So the view of eternalism is what most religions in the world subscribe to. So Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, subscribe to the view of eternalism. That is, there is some kind of eternal soul that will survive forever after death. So the goal of Christianity and Islam is to be reborn in an eternal heavenly paradise, right? So for those religions, their view is the existence of such a life, that such an eternal life exists. That's the view of eternalism. The view of annihilationism is the exact opposite, which is you can see is a prevailing view in the world in scientific materialism. So on the one side, you have many people who believe in a creator God and an eternal life, Christians, Muslims, who are the majority of the population in the world, right? And then on the other side, you have people who maybe uh, thinking according to scientific knowledge, thinking that this life is one kind of view, not the only one. But so this life is essentially a physical existence. So the body is a physical thing, and when the body dies, it's over. Life is finished. There's nothing else. So that's the view of annihilationism. Now, both of these actually are based on the view of a self. There's a view that there is a self that exists and is eternal. It will live forever after death. The view of eternalism, the theist position for the most part. Then there's the view of annihilationism that believes that the self is a material thing and that it will be destroyed at death. And there's nothing else. Now, the Buddha doesn't subscribe to either of these views. These are almost everyone in the world falls into one of these two. We can understand how profound the Buddha's teaching is, how unique the Buddha's teaching is, and the wisdom of the Buddha to be able to see through these views. So this Dīghanakha, wanderer Dīghanakha, thinks nothing is acceptable to him. So he doesn't like any kind of birth. So we can understand him as an annihilationist. So he's not interested in a future life, not being reborn. So the Buddha says, this view of yours, Aggivesana, nothing is acceptable to me, is not at least that view acceptable to you. Now this is a very subtle point the Buddha is making here. So firstly, does anyone remember in the Dhamma there's something called clinging? You know, clinging, right? Now, can anyone tell me what clinging is? How the Buddha describes clinging, if you remember?
Clinging is just like attachment.
Okay. Now, the Buddha described 4 kinds of clinging, 4 ways we get attached to things. Does anyone remember what they are? If you remember the Pali's bonus point.
Sensual desire.
Kama Samanas,
Yeah, it's
Dittyupada,
the first.
Silabbata and Arthavad.
I didn't
Silabbata
hear the...
and Arthavad Upada.
Okay, yes. So, thank you, Prasad. So in English, it would be clinging to sensual pleasures. Beings are attached to sensual pleasures. Clinging to views, clinging to wrong views. So a person who believes in an eternal self, an eternal life after death, when they hear the Buddha's teachings, that there's no such thing, there's no such world, maybe they don't want to let go of that view. They're still attached to that idea. They desire that. They want an eternal life after death. They want to live in an eternal paradise. And the Buddha teaches otherwise, and they don't want to accept that. They're holding on to that view. And then clinging to maybe precepts and practices. So various people can do various things in life, undertake various practices aiming at freedom from suffering. So things like, for example, in Hinduism, the type of food a person eats is considered important in some, and as I understand, maybe in some sects of Hinduism. So the type of food that a person takes is conducive to liberation. That's the idea there. So there's a view there and also is clinging to such practices. It's one example. And then clinging to the notion of a self. So everyone except an arahant has the notion, the kind of feeling in their life that like I am here, I am living, I am experiencing these things. Asmi man, I am, I exist. So it's centered around an I, right? Experience, centered around the notion of an I. So everyone except an arahant experiences that. And we cling to that notion of a self. Attvanupadan. Now, clinging to views, here the Buddha is describing clinging to views. So Dīghanakha, the wanderer, says, nothing is acceptable to me, but actually he is attached to that view itself. He desires that view. He probably identifies with that view. It's my view. Nothing is acceptable to me. Right? So here the Buddha is pointing out a subtle point. If this view of mine were acceptable to me, Master Gautama, it too would be the same. It too would be the same. Well, Agdivisana, there are plenty in the world who say, it too would be the same, it too would be the same, yet they do not abandon that view, and they take up still another view. Those are few in the world who say, it too would be the same, it too would be the same, and who abandon that view and do not take up some other view. So though he says, nothing is acceptable to me, he dislikes everything, he actually has a liking for that view itself. That is a kind of clinging, the Buddha is pointing out. Then, the Buddha says, Aggivesana, there are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: everything is acceptable to me. So there are some recluses and Brahmins who delight in eternal existence. There are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: nothing is acceptable to me. There are two extremes, the extreme of eternalism and annihilationism. And there are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. So there are some who categorically decide that they like some things and dislike other things. Or we can understand it in terms of people who believe in some kind of eternal life, but not another. So, for example, a view that I think the view of Christianity would fall into this category. So, to believe that at a certain point, a being was created. So, with the beginning of this life, there is some creator God that created this life. And before that, this being didn't exist. So it came into being at some point, and it will live eternally after death. So before a certain point, there was non-existence of being. So this is called partial eternalism. So it's really astonishing, right, that the Buddha realized these kind of views and then taught about them. How subtle can some of them be, right? Among those, the view of those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine and view, everything is acceptable to me, is close to lust, close to bondage, close to delighting, close to holding, close to clinging. The view of those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine and view, nothing is acceptable to me, is close to non-lust, close to non-bondage, close to non-delighting, close to non-holding, and close to non-clinging. So, a person who holds the view of annihilationism, well, first, when this was said, the wanderer Dīghanakha remarked, Master Gautama commends my point of view. Master Gautama recommends my point of view. So why does he say this? Because his view of annihilationism is, so a person can come to hold this view because they are maybe they're fed up with life and they don't want to experience suffering in the future. But so even though that view is close to non-lust, close to non-attachment, there's still some attachment there actually to that view itself. Why? Because the Buddha teaches that there is another existence for beings who have defilements, right? So there is another life. Even though a person wants to be free from suffering, they can't just adopt the view of annihilationism and become freed that way. Does that make sense? So the Buddha teaches there is a future life for beings who are fettered by craving and shrouded in ignorance. But someone thinks, well, I don't want to experience suffering in another life. I would rather just have things end with this life. So that kind of view is close to non-attachment, but there's still attachment to that view itself. And there's still craving for non-existence. You understand?
How it was, sir? Is it okay to ask a question at this point?
It's okay.
Yeah, so now the Vibhava Raga it goes with this annihilationism.
I think that's one way we can understand it, yes. There's, now not everyone who has the view of annihilationism maybe has this strong craving for non-existence. So another way it can happen, which is I think what, so most people who hold the view of annihilationism in the world today, I think they have strong craving for sensual pleasure actually. So if a person believes that there's no future life and there's no results of bad deeds, then they can behave in whatever way they want in this life to gratify themselves. So they can do whatever they want if they can get away with it, to get pleasure for themselves, kill, steal, engage in sexual misconduct, tell as many lies as they want, right? If it benefits themselves. So people would do that because of craving for sensual pleasures, right? To gain some kind of happiness for themselves, like hedonism. So a person with such craving can also adopt the view of annihilationism because then they don't have to experience any results of their actions according to their thinking. Do you understand that?
So that means actually they want to exist, although it looks like they want to cheat themselves. They want to exist without having any fear and with pleasure. And to get that, they create this kind of a view. So Tathagata has, I think in one of the sutta, I can't remember, he says that Vibhava Raga is somewhat similar to Bhava Raga. So they are like, Vibhava Raga means Bhava Raga. So
I don't remember that point. There's to study this point further, you can look up a sutta that's called Dīghanakhasutta Sutta. I think it's in Itivuttaka. There the Buddha explains this.
Oliyanti eke and Atidavanti eke. Oliyanti means sasata and Atidavanti means
Yes, yes. So now the Buddha is going to point out the danger of holding these kind of views. Now first I wanted to mention, so Can anyone tell me what the first sutta is? What the Buddha's first discourse in the Sutta Pitaka is? Not the first discourse he taught, but the first discourse in the Sutta Pitaka. Does anyone know? Of course, you can look it up on the computer, but
So which Pitaka is Dīghanakhasutta?
Sutta Pitaka. So in the Sutta Pitaka, I'll give you the answer. So in the Sutta Pitaka, the Dīghanakhasutta is first. And in the Dīghanakhasutta, the first sutta is the Brahmajala Sutta. Has everyone read that? Ah, really? You have to read that. That's very important. So just think for a moment. The elder monks of the past, maybe 2,000 years ago, or even longer ago, who compiled the Sutta Pitaka. So the Buddhist teachings were transmitted orally, right, in the beginning. So there was no such thing as like an organized collection of discourses. The Buddha didn't teach in such a way. But later, for the sake of posterity, and for the sake of collecting the Buddha's teachings, elder monks in the past organized the discourses into collections. The Dīghanakhasutta, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, right? So the Buddha didn't say, okay, now I'm going to teach the Majjhima Nikaya. And he taught the 152 suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. That's not the way it happened. So monks in the past organized the suttas. Now, they put in the Sutta Pitaka as the very first discourse, the Brahmajala Sutta. Why? They could have put the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first discourse, or the Anattalakkana Sutta, Buddha's second discourse. Why didn't they put them first? Why did they put the Brahmajala Sutta first? Because the Brahmajala Sutta is like the entranceway, the door to entering the Buddha's teachings. Because in that sutta, the Buddha explains an all-encompassing teaching on views. So as I explained before, almost everyone in the world subscribes either to the view of eternalism or annihilationism. But the Buddha's teaching is different. Buddha's teaching doesn't side with either extreme view. And the Buddha teaches anatta, non-self. So both of those views are based on the view of a self. Anatta is non-self. So in this way, the Buddha's teaching is very different. And to understand that and to kind of approach that, it's important first to clear away all of the wrong views that a person can hold about a self in the world. So in the Brahmajala Sutta, the Buddha explains this. Buddha explains 62 kinds of wrong views that a person can hold about the self in the world. And they're all based on the view of a self. So if you haven't read that sutta, please read that. It's very important. Just understand the importance that it's the very first sutta in the Sutta Pitaka. It has a very exalted, respectable position in all of the Buddha's teachings. Now, can anyone explain to me? So the Buddha teaches non-self, and the Buddha doesn't subscribe to either of these two extreme views, the view of eternalism or annihilationism. So how does the Buddha teach that? How does the Buddha teach non-self? What is the unique teaching in Buddhism that differs from these other two views?
Oh, sorry, Bante. Could it be the middle path, the noble eightfold path? No.
That's right. In terms of views, though, what is the middle way in terms of views? Not in terms of practice. So the middle way in terms of practice is not veering towards indulgence in sensual pleasure and not veering towards self-mortification, right? As the Buddha taught in the first discourse. But in terms of views, how does the Buddha teach the middle way? I'll give you a hint, maybe if you've read chapter 12 in the Samyutta Nikaya.
Impermanence?
Dependent origination, Bhante.
Yes.
Dependent origination.
Yes. So that is the answer. Now, can anyone explain to me? So, what is the significance of that in terms of these two extreme views, eternalism and annihilationism? The Buddha doesn't subscribe to either, and the Buddha teaches dependent origination. So how do we understand that? There's a view of a self, and the Buddha's teaching on non-self and dependent origination. How do we make sense of that?
Can I try again, Bhante? Everything happens because of a cause, Bhante, because of a condition. And it's a cause and effect theory.
Yeah, so the principle of cause and effect, causation, things arise according to causes, and they cease when those causes cease. So this is the Buddha's teaching on impermanence. So the other views are thinking in terms of a self because they're thinking in terms of, they're not thinking in terms of cause and effect. Right? So to consider something as a permanent self, then it is not arisen from causes. But the Buddha points out that in this life, we cannot find such a thing that is permanent, that exists independent of causes, that we can consider a self. So that's the like hallmark of the Buddha's teaching is dependent origination, of teaching on conditionality. We have to understand that. I think Jivananda Bhante has taught dependent origination before. So that is the way to understand impermanence. That is the way to understand non-self. Without dependent origination, we can't understand those things. Now the Buddha explains the danger in becoming attached to views. Now Agavesana, a wise man among those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine in view, everything is acceptable to me. He considers thus, if I obstinately adhere to my view, everything is acceptable to me, and declare only this is true, anything else is wrong, then I may clash with the two others, with the recluse or Brahmin, who holds the doctrine in view, nothing is acceptable to me, and with the recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. I may clash with these two. And when there is a clash, there are disputes. When there are disputes, there are quarrels. When there are quarrels, there is vexation. Thus, foreseeing for himself clashes, disputes, quarrels, and vexation, he abandons that view and does not take up some other view. This is how there comes to be the abandoning of these views. This is how there comes to be the relinquishing of these views. So, different religions or philosophers can get together and debate about their views. And maybe each one is firmly attached to his or her view and believes that that is the sole truth, that the other party is completely wrong. So, for example, maybe a debate between theists and atheists, right? Complete opposite positions, right? So one party believes that there's a creator God who created the world. The other party doesn't believe in such a thing. Or we can understand it in terms we spoke about before, eternalism and annihilationism. So the theist who believes in an eternal afterlife, and the atheist who doesn't believe in a God, who believes that with the end of this life, everything is finished. So they're both opposed to one another, right? So if each person firmly holds, is attached to his or her view, then disputes arise and then get in arguments with one another. But if one isn't attached to that view, if one lets go of that view, then such arguments don't occur. That's the Buddha's point here. He's trying to detach Dīghanakha from his view. And the Buddha explains the same thing in relation to the other views. So if a person holds to the view of eternalism, then they would get into arguments with people who hold the view of annihilationism. People who hold the view of annihilationism, if they're firmly attached to that, they can get into arguments with people who hold the view of eternalism. So, seeing this, the Buddha points out that a person who understands this abandons these views and relinquishes these views. So at this point, the Buddha has taught us about views. There's a very special point in the Buddha's teaching. When you have time, please read the Brahmajala Sutta. Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is quite good. It's available for free online. You can find that. The first sutta in the Dīghanakhasutta. Now, the Buddha is going to speak about insight contemplation, practicing insight meditation. Now, Agivesana, this body made of material form, consisting of the four great elements, procreated by a mother and father, and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, or we could say, and conditioned by food, sustained by food and nutriment, is subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. So the Buddha says that the body is made of material form. So in the five aggregates affected by clinging, the first is rupa, right? Form. So the body is included in form. Form aggregate affected by clinging. And the Buddha points out that the body is made of the four great elements. Can anyone tell me what the four great elements are?
Earth, water, fire, air.
Yes. Earth, water, fire, and air, or you could say heat too. Earth, water, heat, and air, or wind. So our body is made up of these four things. So there are solid parts of the body, there are liquid parts of the body, there's a heat in the body, right? And there's air in the body. So if we contemplate in this way, we're not thinking in terms of a self at that moment, right? We're thinking of the body as an impersonal collection of these four things: the earth element, the water element, the heat element, and the air element. So the body came into existence because of our mother and father. And the body is built up out of boiled rice and porridge. So the body is sustained, the body matures and grows because of the food we eat. Without taking food, we would not be able to sustain the body. And the body is subject to impermanence. So a good example of that, the body ages, right? So the aging process is impermanence. The way the body looked when we were 10 years old, does it look that way now? Body is impermanent, right? It has changed drastically. When you look at a person 10 years old, it's quite different picture from person when they're 30 years old, person when they're 60 years old or 80 years old, right? So the body has changed. It is impermanent. It's subject to being worn and rubbed away. This is why we wear personal protective equipment when doing various jobs, gloves, hard hat, boots. Why? Because we can get into various accidents with the body. Various tools, if they're used in the wrong way and come into contact with the body, we could lose limbs, right? Why? Because the body is subject to being worn and rubbed away. When I was a layman, I worked in a chemical laboratory, and if we didn't wear, say we don't wear gloves or eye protection, and some dangerous chemical spills on the skin, or if some chemical gets splashed into the eye, you can go blind. Why? Because that's the nature of the body. The body is subject to being worn and rubbed away. If that were not the nature of the body, then we wouldn't have to use those protective equipment, right? The body is subject to dissolution and disintegration. When a person dies, what happens to the body? So these days people are cremated, but in the Buddha's time, the bodies would be taken to like an isolated area in the forest, and they would decay, right? And what is left after the body is decayed? The body has become soil, right? This is the nature of the body, the nature of this body that we consider I, mine, and myself. Well, what is the reality? This body is not mine. We can't consider it I, not I am, not myself. We can't control it as we wish. Then the Buddha tells us how we should contemplate on the body. It should be regarded in this way: aniccato, dukkhato, rogato, gandato, sallato, agato, abadato, parato, palokato, sunyato, anattato. For those of you who like Pali or are able to understand Pali, these are important words to memorize if you can. Why? Because the Buddha is teaching us how to contemplate. Instead of thinking about the body in terms of I, me, mine, we should think about it in this way. How? As impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, as a dart, as a calamity or misery, as an affliction, an illness, as alien, or we could say in another way, as belonging to someone else, parato, belonging to another person, not our possession, as disintegrating, as empty, as not self. So what is the Buddha teaching here? The Buddha is teaching the three characteristics of existence: anicca, dukkha, anatta. So by contemplating in this way, a person is contemplating about the impermanence of the body, about the nature of suffering in the body, subject to various illnesses, subject to disintegration. It's a disease, a dart, a misery, an affliction. And also contemplation on non-self is empty, belongs to another, alien to us, non-self. We cannot control it as we wish. So by thinking in this way, when one regards this body thus, one abandons desire for the body, affection for the body, subservience to the body. So how does one abandon desire for the body? Just by making the determination, okay, now I'm not going to be attached to the body anymore. Finished. Is that the way? No. We have to think in this way. We have to think over and over again, contemplate on the nature of the body. So by doing that, we are actually contemplating according to reality. So normally, our perceptions are inverted. We are shrouded in ignorance. So to remove that ignorance and give rise to true knowledge, we need to contemplate according to the way the Buddha taught. So to do that, it's very important. First, we need to learn the Buddha's teachings in this way. We need to remember them. We need to memorize them as much as we can. No, I don't think for most people these days to memorize a sutta like this, the whole sutta, is, I think, beyond most people's capabilities. But if we're able to memorize these words, if you can't understand Pali, to memorize them in English, and then to contemplate on them. If we can't remember the Dhamma we've learned, we haven't memorized it, then what do we have to practice in our daily life? Right? Especially when it comes to meditation and to contemplation in this way, insight meditation, if we haven't memorized the Dhamma, then we don't have something to contemplate on. It's very important. The Buddha explains in how a learned, noble disciple practices sutta, datta, vachasa paricita, manasanupekkita, ditya supatividya. So first we need to learn the Buddha's teachings. We need to keep them in mind, memorize them. We need to chant them. So these days, because the Dhamma is in books, we might reach the second step at most, to remember them. But we need to memorize the words as the Buddha taught them. So it's okay if you do it in English, if possible. Then once we've memorized them and recited them, then we need to investigate them. We need to think about what we memorize, contemplate on that. And that way, we can purify our view. So what is our wrong view? Sakkaya ditthi. We are immersed in the view of a self, thinking in terms of I, me, and mine when we experience this life. But that is a wrong view. What is the right view? The right view is understanding that things arise according to causes and cease with the cessation of those causes. Form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness are all impermanent. They arise because of causes and cease with the cessation of those causes. So none of them can be regarded as a self. There are, Aggivisana, three kinds of feeling. Now the Buddha has taught about the body, how we should contemplate on the body to remove desire for the body. We need to see the danger in the body. Now, even if we don't get COVID, we could get so many other kinds of illnesses, right? Even if a person doesn't get coronavirus, they can get cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, various kinds of illnesses, right? Not just coronavirus. So if a person escapes from coronavirus, they're going to get some other kind of illness though, right? Why? Because it's the nature of the body to become sick. We should contemplate in this way to remove desire for the body. Otherwise, when this life comes to an end, and we experience our final moments, if we're attached to our body, that becomes an obstacle to us. Right? There are, Agivesana, 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So feeling is the affective tone of our experience in life. When we experience something and pleasure arises. When we experience something and pain arises, maybe some kind of pain in the body, a headache, or we stub our toe, hit our head on something, pain arises. There's also a neutral kind of feeling as well. It's not pleasure, it's not pain, but there's some kind of feeling there. Now, can anyone tell me, so the Buddha explains here 3 kinds of feeling. Has the Buddha explained feeling in any other way as well?
Yes, Bante.
Can anyone tell me,
Um,
as you remember, another explanation of feeling?
Bante, the other explanation is feeling born of eye contact, feeling born of ear contact, nose contact, feeling born of tongue contact, and feeling born of body contact, and feeling born of mind contact.
Okay. So feelings also arise in these ways. There are 6 kinds of feelings, as Linda mentioned. So the feelings born of contact at the 6 senses. Now, can anyone explain to me what contact is? What is this contact that Linda mentioned?
Contact arises from a sense or the mind taking a sense object or a mental object. When the eye, oh gosh, I'm not sure I'm getting the order right. When the eye, well, contacts an eye object, makes visual contact with something. That sounds redundant. Then contact arises, but I guess contact has already arisen. I am still very confused by the order in which
Okay.
things arise, but I'm kind of flailingly trying to say that yes, an eye takes an eye object and contact arises. Is that the right way to say it?
Okay, so the Buddha taught, for example, in terms of eye contact, Chakkuncha paticca rupechu pajjati chakku vinyanam. Independence on the eye and forms, the visual objects, eye
Right.
consciousness arises.
There we go.
So there's an awareness, knowledge of the visual object, that's consciousness. Chakku vinyeya rupa, forms to be known, to be cognized by eye consciousness. Now, so independence on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Tinnang sangati passo is the Buddha's definition of contact. The meeting of the 3, when those 3 things come together, that is eye contact. So
See
all
that?
3 need to be there, including consciousness.
Right, sure.
So that's the order that the Buddha explained.
Where there's life, yeah.
So putto vedeti, or passapaccaya vedana. So independence on contact, feeling arises. So when we see an object, the eye, and forms arise. And in dependence on those two, I consciousness arises. And we should understand this is happening every moment. I consciousness arises. When those three things come together, there's eye contact. Now from that contact, a feeling arises. It can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. Now we should understand too that, so normally we live this world, live this life, as if we are here and there's an objective world outside. Objective in the sense that everyone is part of the same world. But, so reflecting in this way about the nature of feelings, say a person watches a movie, two people watch a movie. One person likes the movie. The other person hates the movie. They don't like it at all. But they watched the same movie, didn't they? But their experience of that movie is different. For one, pleasure arose, and they enjoyed the movie. For another person, they didn't have that same pleasure. Maybe displeasure arose, pain arose, mental pain. They didn't like it for some reason or another. But they watched the same movie. So they had different perceptions of the movie. They had different feelings arising when they watched the movie. Another example we can understand, maybe in your office or at home. You think at home. So your children, when you see your children, a pleasant feeling probably arises, and you're happy when you see your children. But if maybe your children have some enemy at school or at work and they're not on good terms with another person, when that person sees your children, sees your child, does pleasure arise for them? Say their enemy. No, they don't like that person. Displeasure arises. A painful feeling arises. But they saw the same person, right? Yourself and that other person both saw your child. But they had different experiences, right? So little by little we can understand that we're not living in an objective world as we might think. I saw two questions about consciousness. So we have a question, how and where does consciousness arise? And how do I recognize this is awareness consciousness? Do we have a name for realization of this consciousness and awareness? So consciousness arises in dependence on, well, first we should say there are 6 kinds of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. There is not one consciousness. There is not one mind. And that's a wrong view. So consciousness arises and ceases depending on conditions. In dependence on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. In dependence on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. In dependence on the nose and smells, nose consciousness arises, and so on with the working of the 6 senses. So consciousness is not a permanent thing. It's not an unchanging awareness, even though it may seem that way in our experience because of our ignorance, our delusion. So consciousness is arising and ceasing extremely quickly. That is why the Buddha said, Samadhim bhikkhave bhaveta, samahito bhikkhave bhikkhu yatha bhutang pajanati. You should develop samadhi, monks, concentration of mind, because a monk who has developed concentration of the mind, samadhi, sees things as they really are. He understands things as they really are. Yatha bhutang pajanati. Because consciousness is arising and ceasing so quickly, we need a very concentrated mind, a very strongly concentrated mind, to be able to see that. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, Samma Samadhi is described as the 4 jhanas, extremely high level of concentration. With the normal mind, we can't see the arising and cessation of consciousness. It happens too quickly. So to recognize consciousness is not an easy thing to do. Do we have a name for the realization of this consciousness? So if a person realizes consciousness as impermanent, along with the other 4 aggregates affected by clinging, so they can attain fruits of the path. They can become a stream enter, once returner, non-returner, or arahant, depending on the strength of their realization. So, and to do that, we need to practice Noble Eightfold Path. So I hope that gives an answer to your question. We should understand consciousness is not a material thing, right? It's a mental thing. So we discussed now feelings. Now the Buddha is going to teach a very important point here. On the occasion when one feels a pleasant feeling, one does not feel painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. On that occasion, one feels only pleasant feeling. On the occasion when one feels painful feeling, one does not feel pleasant feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. On that occasion, one feels only painful feeling. On the occasion when one feels neither painful nor pleasant feeling, a neutral feeling, maybe in your experience, you're sitting down in a chair. That sitting, that contact with the body, is that pleasurable, painful, or neutral? Or probably, what do you think?
It's neutral, Bhante, I would say.
Neutral, right? But maybe if you listen to your favorite song, is that pleasant, painful, or neutral?
Tends to be pleasant.
Pleasant, right? But what if you're listening to that song while you're sitting in that chair? And you also have a headache. Pleasant feelings are arising, painful feelings are arising, and neutral feelings are arising.
Yes.
Right? And each moment, whenever you feel one, you don't feel the other two. I think the listening to music is a good example, I think. If you're listening to a pleasant song, there's pleasure arising because of ear contact. But maybe you also have a headache, and so there's a painful feeling arising from body contact.
And the neutral feeling arising from body contact as well, from sitting in the chair.
Or a neutral feeling arising from eye contact. Maybe you're looking at the wall, looking around the room, not quite pleasant. Exactly. Looking at the couch, not painful, neutral feeling. So these are arising and ceasing very quickly, extremely rapidly. So the Buddha gave a simile for feeling. It's like a water bubble. And when it's raining very hard on the ground and you look at the pavement, say, you see water bubbles arising and disappearing, right? Have you ever took time to look at that?
Yes, Bhante.
When the next time it rains very hard, take a look at that. But that's the Buddhist simile for feeling. How quickly hundreds, thousands of water bubbles are rising and ceasing. So to see feelings too arising and ceasing, one needs a very concentrated state of mind. Otherwise, it's not possible to see it because of the speed. So I gave you the example of the music, and you can understand a little bit, I think, how quickly the feelings are changing. But normally we don't have an awareness of that, right? So let me, you have the question. Yeah, if you sit for a long time, you'll feel pain. So then the contact also changes, right? So maybe it's a neutral feeling for some time, but after sitting for hours, then maybe pain arises. So there's 6 types of consciousness. Meditation. So we should understand consciousness as a mental thing, but it arises in dependence on name and form. So without the body, is there such a thing? Can we talk about consciousness? Without name and form, we can't talk about consciousness. So consciousness is arising in dependence on the body, independence on the 6 physical senses, right? And so the name for this consciousness, the name is consciousness. We shouldn't understand it as like, yeah, so consciousness is the name for this awareness of the object. You can understand it in that way, I think. So is feeling a little clearer to you now? So in dependence on different kinds of contacts, we experience different kinds of feelings. Now, even the nature of the contact, as I gave you the example of the movie, isn't the same for each person. Why? Because contact arises because of 3 things: the internal sense, the external sense object, and the corresponding consciousness. So maybe, let's say a person is sick, they have a fever, and so normally a contact that would be pleasant, maybe a piece of silk clothing, a fine piece of clothing or cloth that gives a pleasant bodily contact, pleasant feeling arises from that. But if they're sick, that same object, maybe you've probably experienced when you have a fever, even a fine tactile object can feel painful. But before it was pleasant, when you weren't sick, right? So what has changed? Isn't the object the same? But contact arises because of 3 things: the internal sense, the external sense, and the corresponding consciousness. When you have a fever, the body has become ill. So the internal sense, the body, is sick. So the contact is different when you're sick. Right? Why? Because the internal sense is changed, impermanent. So even the nature of contacts, we shouldn't understand that the nature of contacts, the nature of the feelings that arise, just depends on the external object. Right? This is a fairly deep sutta. I hope everyone is following along. It's we need to be patient when learning these kind of Dhamma topics, studying them over and over again, listening to Dhamma talks over and over again. So little by little we can develop our wisdom and understand what we're learning. Then the Buddha teaches us how to contemplate on feeling. Pleasant feeling, Agivesana, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away and ceasing. Painful feeling too is impermanent, anicca, sankhata, kaidamma, impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away and ceasing. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling or neutral feeling too is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away and ceasing. So because all these feelings are impermanent, we should remove our desire and attachment for them. Now, can anyone tell me in dependent origination, we have avidya pati. Well, let me ask, how many of you have memorized it in Pali? Dependent origination?
I do, Bante.
Like Linda knows. I think Prasad Pasika probably knows. Some of you, it might be difficult to memorize in Pali. If you can, very beneficial. If you can't, at least in English would be good. So in dependence on ignorance, formations arise. With formations as condition, consciousness arises. With consciousness as condition, name and form arises. With name and form as condition, the six sense bases arise. With the six sense bases as condition, contact arises. With contact as condition, feeling arises. Then what happens?
Craving.
Vedana patyaya tanha, right? With feeling as condition, craving arises. So what is craving? The noble truth of the origin of suffering. What keeps us bound to repeated birth and death in samsara? Right, so the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination, the Buddha's teaching the causes and conditions for our suffering to arise, for the continuation of samsara. But actually a very deep teaching, extremely deep teaching, dependent origination. And through that we understand impermanence. So dependent on contact, feelings arise. Because feelings arise with a condition, they are impermanent. When that contact changes, the feeling changes. Whether it's pleasant, painful, or neutral, all those feelings are impermanent because they arise with contact as a condition. Seeing thus, a well-taught, noble disciple who has learned the Dhamma well, becomes disenchanted with pleasant feeling, disenchanted with painful feeling, disenchanted with neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Being disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated from all defilements. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. He understands, birth is destroyed, the spiritual life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there's nothing more to be done to attain Nibbana. A monk whose mind is liberated thus, Agivesana, sides with none and disputes with none. He doesn't get into arguments and debates. An Arahant. Why? He employs the speech currently used in the world without adhering to it. So the Arahant has no notions of I, me, and mine. Even a stream enter has abandoned the view of a self. But an Arahant has abandoned all notions of a self, I, me, and mine. But even still, he uses words like I, mine, because they are the common expressions in the world. But he uses them understanding the fact that they don't have a essence that they're actually pointing to. It's just a convention. Mine. there's a nice verse the Buddha spoke. Maranena pitang pahiyati yang puriso mamidanti manniti evang disvana pandito na mamattai na me tamamaku. Whatever a person considers as this is mine, that is abandoned at death. The person thinks of the body as mine, their possessions, their house, their car, right? But when they die, they have to abandon all those things. They can't take anything with them, right? So seeing this with wisdom, the wise person, the Buddha's disciple, shouldn't incline to think of things in terms of mind. There's a nice verse in the Jara Sutta, in the Sutta Nipata. Now on that occasion, the Venerable Sariputta was standing behind the Blessed One, fanning him. Then he thought, the Blessed One indeed speaks to us of the abandoning of these things through direct knowledge. Buddha has a direct realization of what he's teaching. The Sublime One, indeed, speaks to us of the relinquishing of these things through direct knowledge. As the Venerable Sariputta considered this, through not clinging, his mind was liberated from the taints. By listening to this discourse, the Venerable Sariputta, who was at that time a stream enter, he became an arahant. So you can understand the depth of the discourse. How, if you really understand everything that Buddha is teaching here, a person can become an arahant. Why? Because in dependent origination, feeling is the proximate cause for craving, right? So if we abandon all ignorance in relation to feeling, then there is no condition for craving to arise. That is, the noble truth of the origin of suffering has been abandoned. There is no more suffering. Why? Because there's no more craving. And we can't just remove craving by wishing. We have to see with insight in such a way that we remove our ignorance. And one of the methods of doing that is contemplating on feelings. It's part of the Satipatthana, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Second one is feeling, right? So this discourse is important also for the reason that the Venerable Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple, became an arahant by listening to this discourse. But in the wanderer Dīghanakha, the spotless, immaculate vision of the Dhamma arose. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. Yang kinchi samudaya dhammang, sabbang tang nirodha dhammang. If you can memorize that in Pali too, or if you're not as comfortable with Pali English, that's also an important point to memorize in the Dhamma. Why? The wanderer Dīghanakha saw the Dhamma, attained the Dhamma. Dhamma here is 4 noble truths. He understood the Dhamma, fathomed the Dhamma, he crossed beyond doubt, did away with perplexity, gained intrepidity, and became independent of others in the teacher's dispensation, in the Buddha's dispensation. So the wanderer Dīghanakha became a stream enter by listening to this discourse. So that is the realization of a stream enter. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. Anything that arises based on causes and conditions ceases with the cessation of those causes. So the 5 aggregates affected by clinging are empty phenomena. They are not mine, they're not I, they're not myself. A stream enter has seen this with wisdom, has seen the impermanence of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, that they arise based on causes. They're impermanent, and they cease with the cessation of those causes. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. as the realization of the stream enter. Now, the Venerable Mahamoggallana, Arahant Mahamoggallana, the Buddha's second chief disciple, once said this verse. I've lost the verse. I'll see if I can remember it. I'll continue with this. So then, after Dīghanakha became a stream enter, he said to the Blessed One, Magnificent Master Gautama, Magnificent Master Gautama, Master Gautama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Gautama for refuge, and to the Dhamma and to the Sangha of monks. From today, let Master Gautama remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life. And that's how the discourse ends. So Dīghanakha became a stream enter, and Venerable Sariputta became an arahant by listening to this discourse. I remembered the verse. So Arahant Moggallana spoke a verse. So people who see the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, Sukumang te patividjanti valagge usunayata ye panchakhande passanti parato no chatano. So they penetrate a subtle thing, like the tip of a hair with an arrow, who see the 5 aggregates affected by clinging as other, not as self, not as mine. So how should we contemplate about feelings? Pleasure, pain, neutral feelings that arise in our lives? We shouldn't think of them as belonging to us. They're impermanent things that arise depending on conditions. They're not mine. They're not I, not myself. Parato no chatana. That's a beautiful verse. Very subtle thing though. To see that and to think in that way, we need a lot of effort. Virya, samma vayama in the Noble Eightfold Path, right effort to give rise to that wise consideration. We need to put in mental effort. We need to remember the Buddha's teaching. We need to call them to mind and then think in that way. And then we have the opportunity to practice the Dhamma, leading to detachment from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So that's the end of the discourse. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to ask them now. There's one question that was asked on the chat. How do I know if I have ignorance? So, ignorance is not having realized the 4 Noble Truths. So, or maybe simply too, easier way you can understand. If you're thinking in terms of a self, if you have the view of a self, then you're ignorant. So all normal people who haven't realized the Buddha's teachings are ignorant. And ignorance and craving are the causes for suffering in our lives. So by removing our ignorance and craving, we can become free from suffering. I think Ian has a question. You have your
Yes,
hand raised.
I am not clear on how it is that dependent origination and the fact that everything arising from a cause is given to cessation. How does that not correspond to and support the view of annihilationism?
Okay, that's a good question. So, for a person who sees with wisdom the arising of dependent origination, they remove the view of annihilationism. For a person who sees with wisdom the cessation of dependent origination, they remove the view of eternalism. So, the arising of dependent origination, the Buddha explains how repeated lives, how rebirth occurs. So, tanha paccaya upadana, with craving as condition, clinging comes to be. We get attached in 4 ways: to sensual pleasures, to views, to precepts and practices, and to the notion of a self. Upadana paccaya bhavu, with clinging as condition, we accrue karma that leads to a future existence. We collect karma that leads to another rebirth, either in the sensual world, which would be the human world, the animal world, hell world, or the sensual heavenly worlds. Or else we create karma. Person can create karma by practicing samadhi, by practicing jhana, that leads to rebirth in the form world. And also a person can create karma by practicing formless meditations that leads to rebirth in those realms. So clinging conditions bhava, the accruing of karma to bear fruit in a future existence. Bhava paccaya jati. So because of karma, karma bears fruit in creating another existence and leading to another rebirth. And after a person is born, they experience all the suffering of life. So that is the way the Buddha explains the arising of suffering in detail. That is in detail the noble truth of the origin of suffering. So if a person understands how rebirth occurs because of causes, then they understand that, so the view that there's no life after death, they understand that there is a cause for a future life, then they can remove that view. And if a person understands that with the cessation of dependent origination, by removing the causes, ignorance, craving, then there won't be the causes for a future rebirth. Then a person can remove the view of eternalism. So there's no eternal self that survives after death. But rebirth occurs, suffering in samsara occurs because of causes. And when those causes cease, rebirth ceases, suffering ceases.
Thank you, Bhante.
That made your question.
Bhante, I have a question. Is it okay if I ask? Yeah, Bhante, now I remember Bhante mentioned about the Sasatavada and the Uchedavada. And I was just thinking, there's the 3 tanhas, right? There's the Kama tanha, Bhava tanha, and Vibhava tanha, right? So now I've seen like different monks give different like interpretations for these. I just want to clarify like what's the right interpretation. So like one view I've heard is that the Bhava tanha is attachment to rebirth in the Rupa Loka. That's one. And then the other one is I've heard that it's not that, but it's clinging to this Sasatavada. Whereas the Vibhava tanha, according to one interpretation, is that it's clinging to the Uchedavada view, annihilation. Whereas the other one is it's clinging to rebirth in the formless Arupa Lokas. Right? So I just wanted to clarify, Bhante, like, is there a sutta that like clearly mentions what's the interpretation, the right interpretation for these?
There are not many places in the suttas where the Buddha explains Vibhava tanha. The maybe the clearest sutta I mentioned before, and I think a link was sent out for it, Dīghanakhasutta. So
Okay.
where I think that was sent, yeah. You sent it, didn't you? Dīghanakhasutta. So
Right, right.
that's the Buddha's explanation of Vibhavatanha, the clearest explanation, I think, in the suttas. So, honestly, there aren't that many details where the Buddha explains these in detail according to your questions. So, we can understand this though. So, a disciple who's gotten rid of kama-tanha doesn't cling to sensual pleasures, right? Say an anagami disciple. So an anagami disciple doesn't cling to sensual pleasures, and because of that, they don't accrue karma that leads to rebirth in the sensual sphere. So no kama bhava is generated. And when there is no kama bhava, then they will not be reborn in the sensual sphere. So they will be reborn in the form world, the formless world. So Lokaswanati has explained one way of Vibhavatanha is so as Dīghanakhasutta explains, also being disgusted with the notion of existence. So a person can practice a kind of meditation to become unaware of everything, to kind of like remove all their experience. And that kind of craving can lead to rebirth in the how do we say it? Like the realm without perception, asanya, the perceptionless realm, that kind of craving. But it leads to another rebirth, right? So all craving is conducive to another rebirth. Pono bhavika is the Buddha's explanation in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So that would be my answer. There's not that many detailed explanations on the Buddha's words.
Bhante. And another question actually about the consciousness, vijnana. Now, Bhante, I've heard this other thing, right? I've heard some monks say that the vijnana is the same as the chitta, and it's also the same as the mano, or the manasa, right? So just want to clarify, Bhante, is there maybe a sutta that like defines like what the differences between these three are? Because what I've heard is like it's the same thing, but according to what it does in different situations, you give it a different name, right? That's what I've heard. I just want to clarify again, Bhante.
So there is a sutta where the Buddha uses those three words synonymously, vijnana, chitta, and mano. So in that sense, yes, they're the same thing. The Buddha described them as synonymous. But in another sense, if we think in terms of satipatthana, the establishments of mindfulness, to understand a mind with lust as a mind with lust, to understand a mind without lust as a mind without lust, sadosang va chittang, sadosang chittang vipajanati, to understand a mind with hatred as a mind with hatred, and so on. So when the mind is arising and ceasing, when we say mind, it's not just vijnana normally, the way we understand it, right? So there's also a perception there. There's a feeling that is arising, right? There are volitional formations that are arising. So it depends on which way you want to consider it. So in the Buddha's teaching, vijnana, as I explained, is sixfold in terms of what type of sense base it arises in dependence on. And also there's the discourse where the Buddha explains that vijnana, chitta, and mano are synonymous. I don't remember exactly where that discourse is. I think you'd be able to find it if you do some searching. But that is the Buddha's words when he explains that.
I see, I see. And Bhante, now in the Paticcasamuppada, right, when it says the vijnana, right, is that talking about the vijnana, like it's the mind that was established in the fetus, right? Is that the right interpretation? And the sankhara is actually the it's the sankhara in the Paticcasamuppada. It's actually talking about the verbal and mental and physical actions in the past life, right? Is that how we should understand it?
So consciousness, you should read the Vibhanga Sutta.
Yeah, Bhante, I read the Vibhanga Sutta. It just says there's 6 classes, but it doesn't
Yeah.
actually go more into detail.
So the 6 classes of consciousness, it doesn't mention anything about consciousness of a fetus, right? It mentions eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, right? So the consciousness of a fetus is included in that, but not just the consciousness of a fetus. And the 3 formations, I don't think we should understand that they're referring to the mental, verbal, and bodily actions in a previous life, because Paticcasamuppada is occurring now to give rise to future existence.
Future, so okay.
So, tanha paccaya upadana, upadana paccaya bhavo, bhava paccaya jati. So that is the way that an existence in a future life is being created. So ignorance exists now, right? Not only in the past life. We are ignorant now.
Right. Because Bhante, I was thinking like in terms of, okay, let's say there's an arahant, right? So in the life of an arahant, right? The ignorance is gone, right? So that ignorance, I'm guessing it's past, right? So then the sankhara, they don't have any more sankharas either, right? But they do have the vijnana. So the vijnana and everything after vijnana, and then everything up to I think Vedana is there for the arahant, right? But that's why the way I understood was that it's the past causes, the vijnana and the sankhara, the avijja, sankhara, and vijnana, they're all past. That's how I understood it because of that. So am I wrong, Bhante? Or?
We should think about dependent origination occurring now, and in this moment. So if they occurred in the past, then how to escape the causes, right? So we should try to think about dependent origination now. Lokaswaminati wrote a detailed book about this. There's an English translation too. Dependent origination. There should be copies at the Toronto Monastery. In detail, several hundreds of pages, Lokaswaminati explains dependent origination, all from suttas. So if you have time, you can read that, and I think that will help to clarify your understanding of it. It's not an easy subject to understand. It may take a very long time reading discourses over and over again to understand what the Buddha is teaching. So even Ananda Swaminatha, Venerable Ananda, once said to the Buddha that this dependent origination looks very clear to me. But Venerable Ananda thought it was easy to understand. But the Buddha said, don't say that. Dependent origination is deep, it's profound. So who said this? A stream enterer, disciple. Venerable Ananda. So we should be extremely patient to try and understand dependent origination.
Yes, Bhante, and also Bhante, now this the sankhara in the dependent origination, is it the same sankhara as in the 5 aggregates?
No.
No.
Lokaswaminatha explained that clearly in the book. So if you look at the Vibhanga Sutta, Buddha doesn't explain, and 5 aggregates affected by clinging, Buddha explains sankhara is sixfold. The volition regarding forms, sounds, smells, tastes, tangible objects, and mental objects. But in dependent origination, the explanation is different. So we shouldn't mix the two up. Sankhara, the word sankhara in Pali has many meanings. So we should understand them depending on the situation, the context in which they use. And for Suvin, I think we should just be patient and try to. So I think you said you're new. So it can take some time to sort everything out in the Buddha's teachings and understand what is what, how the Buddha is explaining things. So we should try to read over and over the Buddha's teachings, to listen to Dhamma talks, associate with monks, because it's not easy to understand. It can take time. So we should practice patience.
Swaminathan, right?
Yes.
Swaminathan, this is a comment, Swaminathan, for the previous question. And there are 2 suttas we can read to understand the relationship between the sankhara and vijnana. Sanchetana Sutta and Parivimarsana Sutta. In Sanchetana Sutta, it says that, like, it goes like this: Yancha Chetekan, and what is that? Yancha Cheteti, Yang Pakappeti, Yancha Anuseti, Arambara Metam Hoti Vijnana Titya. So that means it happened these times when we have Chetana, expectations and needs, wantings, then it is the beginning of Vijnana. And after that, the same Sutta explaining Sanchetana Sutta, Namarupang, I think Namarupang, the development of the Namarupang happens. After that, then the Patissamuppada goes like that, starting from Chetana, Yancha Cheteti, Yang Pakappeti, Yancha Anuseti, Arambana Meta Hoti Vijnana Titya. So like that it goes from Chetana, Vijnana, Namarupa, Salayatana.
There is also that explanation, yes.
And then Parivimarsana Sutta, it goes like Avidya, Sankhara, Punya, Apunya, and Ananya Visankhara, and then Vijnana. So that's 2 suttas, Buddha explains that it happens this time. At the present, yeah.
And I think also, what is I remember the right name of the sutta? Maybe Sattarthana Sutta? The sutta where the Buddha explains Jnanavattu Sutta. Yeah, Jnanavattu Sutta and Dutiya Jnanavattu Sutta. On the cases of knowledge, they also explain Paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. We can understand how it's happening at present. And the same method in which dependent origination occurred happened in the past as well. So not in terms of factors in the past, but the same process. So those suttas are also interesting to look at. Now, the suttas you mentioned about Punya Sankhara, Aninja Sankhara. So those are different words than the way the Buddha explains in Vibhanga Sutta. So in terms of the mental formation, the verbal formation, and the bodily formation. So, like I said, there are different meanings for the word sankhara. So we should study over and over again and try to understand the meaning in that context, the way the Buddha is teaching. And Lokaswanath's book is also helpful for that.